Hey everybody, welcome back to the Revisionist Almanac. It is Andrew here, and I'm back with another edition of the Listener Questions Mailbag. So if you're listening to this right now, the 1991 episode with Liz Arnold and Scott Cole has been up for a week now. If you haven't listened or watched that, go check it out first, then pop back in here to this one. Alright, I am here all alone in my podcasting cave, and it's time to get into the questions that you submitted to me. Okay. Up first, we have a question from both Screen Nerds Podcast and Best Picture Cast and Kieran B. over there. They both brought the same general question, so I'll combine it into one. That question is, if there was a Best Animated Feature Oscar for 1991, what would be your nominees and what would win? So I would say if they had an animated category in 91, I would obviously put Beauty and the Beast in there, which was up for Best Picture that year. I would include Only Yesterday, and An American Tail, Fievel Goes West, which is a movie I vividly remember going to see in the theater as a 6-year-old. And of those three movies, as much as I enjoy Fievel Goes West, and as impressed as I am by Only Yesterday as a film, I think the obvious answer here is Beauty and the Beast would have hands down won Best Animated Feature if it existed at the time. There's a reason why it was a Best Picture nominee after all. The next question from Screen Nerds Podcast is, what are your thoughts on Regarding Henry? Personally, I feel it's an underrated film with some great performances from Harrison Ford and Annette Bening. Also wild that it's one of J.J. Abrams' first produced scripts. Okay, now Scott Cole mentioned it on the episode, and he said he had a good time with it, even if he didn't nominate it for anything. I will, however, say I put all of my prep energy into a number of other films, and I did not get to Regarding Henry for 1991. I've seen it before. It's been a while. It was honestly never on my radar when it came to prep because I don't remember it being that great. Therefore, there was a very low chance I would ever nominate it for anything when it came to my revisions. At some point, I will probably go back and check out Regarding Henry, and I'll update you Screen Nerds Podcast on what I think of it. Okay, up next we'll go over to Chauncey Talese, who always brings a ton of fun, interesting questions to the equation. His first one was, who finished second to Jack Palance in supporting actor? This is kind of a tricky one. I would assume that the two Bugsy actors nominated, both Harvey Keitel and Ben Kingsley, probably split the votes between them. And if I had to be pressed, I would say Tommy Lee Jones was the most likely one in a distant second place, though it certainly seemed like Palance had this thing locked in the bag early. However, if I was really pressed, Tommy Lee Jones from JFK would be my answer. The next question from Chauncey was, do either Geena Davis or Susan Sarandon win if they run in the supporting actress category? Now, I put both actresses in the lead category where they were actually nominated, and I think it would be almost impossible to move Thelma or Louise into a support. It is very much a two-handed movie with co-leads. If I was pressed, though, I would probably lean towards moving Susan Sarandon into support, and on the notion that she's in the supporting category that year, I think she absolutely would have been a heavy favorite to beat Mercedes Ruehl, because that win has not necessarily stood the test of time the way a lot of other wins in this category have around this era. So that's the direction I would lean there. Chauncey then asked, what finished in 6th place in the Best Picture race? Now obviously, again, this was a time where there were only 5 nominees for Best Picture. If I was absolutely pressed to pick one movie that's just on the outside looking in, I think it's going to be a coin flip between either Boys in the Hood or Thelma and Louise. Both of them obviously had Best Director nominations that year for Ridley Scott and John Singleton, respectively. However, we were still in a very predominantly white American voting body at the time, so based on that, I'm going to give the edge to Thelma and Louise likely being 6th place that year. Okay, next question from Chauncey. Why didn't The Silence of the Lambs get a score or cinematography nomination? Good question. It's absolutely baffling to me this missed in each of these categories given how much it dominated the categories it was actually in 1991. I think it would have easily beaten The Fisher King or The Prince of Tides in the original score category, neither of those particularly memorable to me. And I also think The Prince of Tides is one of the most baffling cinematography nominations in a while, so I would have absolutely swapped out The Silence of the Lambs for The Prince of Tides in the cinematography category, and it probably should have won there as well. Alright, Chauncey keeps them coming. He asked, did Oliver Stone finish second in the Best Director category? In my humble opinion, I think he absolutely was a lock for second place. Neither John Singleton or Ridley Scott had much of a chance in my eyes, with neither of their movies being in the Best Picture lineup. And as far as Bugsy goes with the voters that year, I don't think Levinson was going to get that close to actually winning the prize. So by default, Oliver Stone, second place. Chauncey also asks, what does a field of 10 Best Picture nominees look like? I always like this kind of question because you have to project a little bit. The two obvious ones that are locks I've already talked about here. Put Boys in the Hood and put Thelma and Louise in right away. They're getting in, so we're already up to 7. For the other 3, I always try to err on the side of the conservative voters in this particular time period. So I'm going to go ahead and say The Fisher King, Rambling Rose, and For the Boys, just to round out, would have been a weird field of 10, and it probably would have diminished the overall lineup if we're looking at some of those other pictures in the 5. So that's kind of where I stand with those 10. Always, though, feel free to leave me your feedback. What do you think would have made a Best Picture 10 in 1991? All right, next question is, does Bugsy have the smallest cultural footprint for a double-digit Oscar nominee in the last 40 years? So for this, we are going all the way back to 1985 to capture that 40-year period. In that period, there are 49 movies to get 10-plus nominations, and I'm not going to go through them all right now, but Bugsy is certainly on the short list for such a distinction with having almost no footprint. Another that would come to mind is David O. Russell's 2013 film American Hustle, which nobody really seems to reference even 12 years later. And the other I would throw into the mix is David Fincher's The Curious Case of Benjamin Button from 2008. That thing earned a whopping 13 nominations, and it's one of the least talked about movies in Fincher's entire catalog. So those would be a couple others that immediately come to mind. And if we're talking about David Fincher, he has another movie with 10 plus nominations, Mank, that I think is too recent to say has zero cultural footprint yet. And it also came out in the middle of the pandemic, which is a factor that it puts in a very weird place in time. So we'll see on that one as well. Okay, another question we got is, why didn't Kevin Costner get a Halo nomination when Dances with Wolves was a year earlier? This is definitely a strange one that he wasn't in the field of 5 nominees for lead actor. I personally put him in my revised lineup, but I would guess it was just a case of other veteran actors with seniority over him in the film industry. So guys like Warren Beatty, Nick Nolte, Robert De Niro, just a little more clout at the time, even though we're coming fresh off the heels of the Dances with Wolves win. I think that probably contributes. And we got a Robin Williams performance that was more of a stretch in range than what I think Costner did in JFK. And as I mentioned on the actual 1991 episode, Robin Williams was kind of a farce being put into lead actor. He is very much a supporting character in The Fisher King, if you ask me. And our very last question from the good man Chauncey. If Jodie Foster didn't have an Oscar for The Accused, does she win for Nell in 1994? Or would she just have the Oscar for The Silence of the Lambs? Damn it, Chauncey, how dare you make me think of Nell once again. I thought we put that to bed last year on the 1994 episode, and it always comes back. I would say we are in a safer world right now where we don't have to refer to Jodie Foster as an Oscar winner for the film Nell, so that's a good thing. But I think if the alternate timeline puts her at 94 without The Accused win, I'm still going to say she loses out to Jessica Lange that year, who I think was the favorite. And then when we get to The Silence of the Lambs win, that would be the only one on her resume if we live in this sort of alternate timeline that you've created, Chauncey. So that's where I would go with that one. All right, next up we got Everett from Watch This Film blog. Always appreciate Everett's questions as well. He said, executives are forcing you to give an above-the-line nomination to either Hook, My Girl, Ernest Scared Stupid, or What About Bob? What nomination are you going to give it, and why? Okay, well, fortunately, we got to talk about several of these movies on the actual 91 episode, which I hope you enjoyed listening to. Liz was all in on the movie Hook, which I've come to realize is Steven Spielberg's most polarizing film. People either love it or they hate it. To answer Everett's question directly, though, I was closest to putting Bill Murray into my Best Actor lineup for What About Bob? I think he's really fun in that movie, and he'd probably take Arnold Schwarzenegger's place in my revised 5, which was the 5th place choice for me for Terminator 2 Judgment Day. I had Arnold just at the bottom, so if I really was pressed, I could easily flip-flop Arnold and Bill Murray and be happy with that as well. All right, next question is from buddy Adam Freed over at MovieArcher.com. He said, where do you rank Sleeping with the Enemy on the list of quote-unquote bad spouse films? It is undoubtedly a pretty elite bad spouse movie, probably on the Mount Rushmore, even though I haven't gone too deep down this particular rabbit hole. The first 2 movies, though, that come to mind when I think of a bad spouse You got Ike Turner and What's Love Got to Do with It, played viciously by Lawrence Fishburne. And then, of course, I think the granddaddy of them all would be Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance in The Shining. He's a father so clearly crazy as hell before he even decides to become the caretaker at the Overlook. So as much as I appreciate the bad spouse in Sleeping with the Enemy, I don't think it's got a candle on Ike Turner or Jack Torrance. All right, another question we got from Kieran B. over at Best Picture Cast. He said, I miss the days of the Billboard #1 songs going head-to-head at the Oscars. Give us a few minutes on the runner-up Bryan Adams and everything he's done for you. Or if you prefer, talk about the late wrestler, also named Bryan Adams. I gotta say, this is an absolutely top-tier question from Kieran. I do appreciate it. I love me some Bryan Adams music, and I'm also a noted pro wrestling fan all the way back to my youth. I think the song from Robin Hood is the very first memory I have as a child where I identified a song exclusively with a film. Because when I close my eyes, I can transport myself back to my parents' living room as a kid, watching Robin Hood on VHS on that small fuzzy TV I've mentioned in the past, and I can immediately hear the song while Kevin Costner gloriously rocks the screen. But it's all not bad days anymore. We still have every now and then some Billboard charting bangers in recent years, so I do want to call out some of those. In 2018, you had Lady Gaga with Shallow from A Star Is Born, an absolute classic, still rocks in my rotation all the time. You got 2017 in Coco, Remember Me, another banger. In 2013, we're talking another animated film, you got Frozen and Let It Go, which was its own cultural phenomenon. And then in 2012, you've got Adele's Skyfall, which I think is one of the great anthems in the entire Bond film franchise. And hey, there's at least a good chance we're going to get at least one K-pop Demon Hunter song in the best song lineup this year, because if we don't, what are we even doing with the category? That thing right now is charting on multiple levels. And quickly on Bryan Adams the wrestler. I can't say he was one of my favorites, but I remember distinctly him as Crush in the early 1990s WWF era, which was the period of time I was getting into wrestling and consuming every pay-per-view I could get my hands on at the rental store on VHS, and I have a lot of memories of Crush. Alright, past guest of the show, also a friend, Betsy Gorham over at Never Seen It, had a question. She said, how would you rank My Own Private Idaho amongst the many modern takes on Shakespeare we got in the 90s? As people may or may not know, since I'm pretty on the record about it, I am not a huge Billy Shakespeare guy. I think the material's boring, it's tired, but I do respect it. Honestly, when it comes to Shakespeare, I enjoy My Own Private Idaho is the only thing that comes into my mind, other than maybe Romeo plus Juliet, just for how silly it is with the acting and the dialogue in that movie. Okay, another past guest of the show, Peterson W. Hill, with a great question. He asked, Anthony Hopkins is widely renowned as one of the greatest to ever do it. Much of his career to the general public starts around this time when he is in his mid-50s. What are some of the other actors that are past their prime that you love and have shot to stardom later than a typical Hollywood career? It's an awesome question. We could really go down an entire run with this. We could do a whole episode on this, quite honestly, but I'm going to isolate this to one male and one female actor to keep things from getting too long-winded. So let's start on the men's side. I'm going to say Richard Jenkins, who's currently 78 years old. His first film role was in 1985 when he was 38, but the first time I really remember him coming to prominence was in 2008 when he was in The Visitor, Step Brothers, and Burn After Reading, all in that calendar year. At that time, he was 61 years old, and in my personal opinion, I think he's only gotten better at his craft over the last 17 years. On the female side, I'm going to go with Olivia Colman, who I think is considered one of the best actors, period. At the moment, she's currently 51 years old, and while I remember her in a small role in Hot Fuzz in 2007, it wasn't really until her run of The Favorite, The Crown, and The Father from 2018 to 2020 that she hit the big time. At that point, she was 44 and perhaps late blooming for stardom, and just like Jenkins, I think Olivia Colman continues to get better and better with time, aging like a fine wine.
Hello, hello. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan. And Movies and Us is a weekly gathering place filled with conversations about movies, stories, and connection.
Our name, Movies and Us, sums it up. We're all about movies and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This film podcast is all about us and our shared stories.
And so we invite you to join us in conversations about movies and the stories that connect us. So you can follow Movies and Us wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube at Movies and Us.
The other question from Peterson was, how rude is it that The Rocketeer never received a sequel, not counting the short-lived animated series? Peterson, I'm with you. We, the 90s kids, deserved so much better with The Rocketeer. This was one of the first superhero movies I remember seeing as a kid, and it still sits proudly on my DVD shelf to the right of me to this day. And I've shown this movie to my kids recently who liked it, but I think they found it a bit dated in comparison to stuff like the MCU that they've grown up on over the last few years. Which is a bit sad for me, but I just have to face the facts. Okay, another question from Peterson. When judging a movie like Daughters of the Dust that feels like it was simultaneously made before cameras were invented and made tomorrow, how do you judge it next to a movie like The Silence of the Lambs that feels hyper-modern? So every year that I do prep for this show, there are a handful of movies that almost feel impossible to judge along with the rest. And in most instances, because they almost feel too authentic and the characters barely feel like they're acting. Daughters of the Dust is one movie that really impressed me on 1991 prep. This was, of course, being the first time I watched it for this episode. As I was watching it, I thought it felt much more like documentary filmmaking, and I would liken Julie Dash, the director, to someone like Chloe Zhao, able to make a story with so much humanity that doesn't feel like there's a single page of script, and instead it just feels like someone with a camera following the world around. In many ways, Daughters of the Dust feels evocative of early Terrence Malick films, and if you know what I'm talking about, it's sort of in that same mold. And one final question from Peterson. Hook is arguably Steven Spielberg's worst film. Do you think making it a musical as initially intended would help, or is this somewhat of a cursed project? As I already said, a divisive movie. Peterson clearly on the side that hates it. I'm going to respectfully disagree with that opinion, but I would be 100% open to them doing a new film interpretation of Hook that is a full-on musical, much like they did with Matilda recently, which I thought was executed very well. But I do also want to quickly shout out David Lowery's 2023 film Peter Pan and Wendy, which is currently on Disney+, and I think it's a very underrated, underseen movie that is at least on par with Hook, in my opinion, for quality and content. Alright, next question we got is from Hannah over at Horror Hour with the Hannahs. She said, what are your favorite horror movies of the year 1991? Obviously, The Silence of the Lambs is considered a horror film by many, and also something that helped make the genre more acceptable on a mainstream level. Now, I don't personally consider this movie a horror film, but I also don't take huge exception if you think it is. But when we talk about strictly horror, like much more conventional horror, Child's Play 3 came out in 91. It's not very good. I've personally never been that big into The People Under the Stairs, even though I'm a Wes Craven and a Stephen King fan. We got Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare, which is a pretty garbage entry into that franchise. So I think by default, my favorite horror movie of 1991 is a movie that I did slightly get scared of when I was 6 years old seeing it for the first time, because of that snotty booger brain troll in Ernest Scared Stupid. So that's going to be my answer. Alright, we're going to switch gears to the royalty, the question queen, Heather Stewart. First up, she said, did My Own Private Idaho walk so Brokeback Mountain could run? You're damn right it did. There are so many parallels between the acting talent of River Phoenix and Heath Ledger, and I think seeing their two performances in these two films side by side is very fascinating and worth your time. Heather also said, compare and contrast Keanu Reeves' performance in Private Idaho and Point Break. Alright, it's no secret that Keanu is not suited for literary material. I'm looking at you, Bram Stoker's Dracula. But I am such a huge Keanu Reeves fan, both his professional work and his long documented handling of everything in his personal life, so I'm going to cut the guy some slack every chance I get. I think he does actually do a pretty good job pulling off a dramatic turn in My Own Private Idaho, which probably helped because he was next to his actual real-life best friend, River Phoenix, and you could tell that they had a bond that translated on and off screen. But what he does in Point Break feels perfectly suited to the laid-back style of Keanu, and it's really hard to compare anything else to that. Alright, another question from Heather. What animated movies deserve to get into the Best Picture lineup before Beauty and the Beast finally did? This is a really tricky question, since I've only gone into so many years for deep dives and revisions on the show. Without giving away my hand too much and not having dove headfirst into all of those years, I think some of the classic Disney films like Snow White will probably be good answers, or something deeply profound like 1988's Grave of the Fireflies comes to mind. It's one of the most devastating movies I think to ever exist, not just in the animation field, and so I think that would very much be a movie that when we get to 1988 probably has a strong chance of getting a revised nomination somewhere along the line. Heather keeps them coming. She said, where does Bodhi rank for you in terms of iconic, charming villains? Is he even really a villain? And would you have let him go at the end as well? Well, respectfully, I think he's definitely a villain, but he's also one where I can clearly see his motivation and understand why he does what he does and why he thinks how he thinks. But as I said on the actual 91 episode, I think Bodhi is flat out one of the coolest characters ever for me. I had no issue giving Patrick Swayze a revised nomination in the supporting actor category. And if I was in Keanu Reeves' shoes at the end, I also would have let him go at the end because there's no way he's surviving that massive wave, and I would have been okay with him letting him go out of the world on his own terms. Alright, we were waiting for them. It's only a matter of time before Heather finally brought some Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves questions, of course. First one, is Kevin Costner's accent one of the worst attempts at an English accent ever? I'm maybe not the expert to analyze that and give you the answer, but to my untrained ears, I think it's atrocious after revisiting it. I'm going to leave it to people in the United Kingdom to decide what is a good or a bad accent of that region. And it's also just worth mentioning, it's a matter of fact at this point, though, that British actors are infinitely better at doing all number of American accents than the other way around. However, I recently watched a 2017 film for prep where Rachel McAdams does an English accent, and I have to give her a huge shout out for actually nailing it, at least to the ears that I have on, which aren't, again, fully attuned to the UK. Heather also said, did Alan Rickman only not get nominated because the film was considered bad? However, he also won the BAFTA. So I really loved going back to watch Robin Hood, strictly to watch Alan Rickman in the movie. It was the exact opposite of how I felt going back and hearing Kevin Costner's accent. Ultimately, though, in my own revised ranking, I had Alan Rickman at number 11. It's a really deep field supporting actor. Almost every single episode, it's the deepest field, and he was just sort of a product of that situation. He was never really going to be in contention for me. But I do think it's odd he won the BAFTA, and he wasn't even in the mix for the Oscars. So to Heather's point, I think it really just comes down to how critically poor the reception was for this movie at that time. Heather also asked, is The Doors one of the few acceptable music biopics? That's my kind of loaded question, and I love it. Alright, so we now live in a world where we expect 2 to 4 music biopics a year, it feels like, because the studios feel like they're a pretty safe way to make money, and they're probably going to gobble up some awards and nominations based on past history. Honestly, it makes me a bit sick at this point because we really don't need to have a biopic about every musician in history, and I'm looking right at you, Sam Mendes, and your damn 4 Beatles biopics coming up. I got no time for it. But I do think The Doors is a solid biopic, whether you're into the band like me, or if you're just somebody totally on the outside. And I'll quickly plug something I have on my Letterboxd page, which is a top 50 list of my favorite music biopics, with The Doors coming in at number 10. So do me a favor, pop over to Letterboxd right now, go to the handle acorns13, that's my personal handle, and dig into that top biopic list and let me know what you think of it. Alright, Heather also asked, what real-life couple would you cast if you were making Bugsy in 2025? Okay, I put honestly very little thought into this question before getting to this recording, but I did just think of a pair of actors that are married and both brilliant in general and thought, well, if these 2 actors are really good, they can probably pull it off. So I'm going to go with Kirsten Dunst and Jesse Plemons, neither of which I can necessarily picture as like-for-like replacements in Bugsy, but they are both more than capable as actors, and they're very much chameleons that I think could pull it off if forced. So that'll be my answer with almost no thought behind it. And our very last question is R.I.P. River Phoenix. What roles that have been played by his peers since he died do you think he would have been great in? It's a great question. I obviously waxed pretty poetically about River Phoenix on the 91 episode, and I'm firmly in the camp that believes if River didn't tragically die at such a young age, he would have gone on to be the most interesting and potentially celebrated actor of his entire generation. It's pretty well documented at this point he was going to be in contention for Titanic in 1997, and I think you could just about insert River Phoenix in almost any of the roles actors like Leo DiCaprio, Jake Gyllenhaal, Heath Ledger and other men of that similar age would have been in over the next 25 to 30 years. But I also think River Phoenix was much more interested in taking projects that creatively stimulated him as opposed to just being in the biggest budget stuff out there. And there's certainly a path where he just goes down a more obscure direction and he kind of veers away from mainstream appeal. So that is also something that's completely on the board if he never passes away. All right, that's it. Thanks to every single person that submitted questions on this one. We've got a bunch more on the next episode. I'm sure they're going to keep rolling in every single month. They're always appreciated. I always have fun doing these, so thank you again. Hope you had a little bit of fun listening to me answering all these questions right now. But it's not just me here on this one. I also have Scott Cole, who took some time out of his day to answer all of these questions as well. So let me turn it over to Scott, and he's going to give you some more 1991 questions and answers.
Hey Andrew, this is Scott Cole again from the 1991 episode, and I'm looking at some listener questions. Okay. If there was a Best Animated Feature Oscar for 1991, who would be your nominees and who would win? So, I obviously picked Beauty and the Beast to be the best picture of 91 because I think it's, great. I was looking through the list of animated movies from 1991, and I actually have not seen very many. I know I saw An American Tail or Five-O Goes West in the theater back in the day. And when I was a kid, I also remember seeing Rock-a-Doodle on video. Now, I have not seen either one of those in a very long time, but I think I'm pretty safe to say Beauty and the Beast is going to hold up in that battle. Thoughts on Regarding Henry? Yes, so I watched Regarding Henry for the first time in my prep for the Almanac and had never seen it before. I'm a big fan of Mike Nichols, and I actually, in his biography that Mark Harris wrote, which is really good, that I read recently, that it's an interesting section about him making that movie because it was kind of a tumultuous time and no one was sure what was good. It just wasn't like the smoothest production or like the writing process and everything like that. I thought the movie was better than I expected it to be. I didn't love it, but I thought it's a little bit corny and it gets a little bit mawkish, I guess you'd say at times. I actually thought Annette Bening was really good in it though, and it's one of her early roles. She was excellent. I will say I liked it better than the other movie from 1991 where a doctor has something bad happen to him and comes down to earth from his arrogance, and that was The Doctor with William Hurt, which I mentioned on the episode. That was one of the worst movies I saw in my prep. So Regarding Henry, it's a marginal thumbs up from me. Okay, who finished second to Jack Palance in supporting actor? I was looking at these. I have no clue, but this is before Tommy Lee Jones had won an Oscar for The Fugitive. So I'm going to say Tommy Lee Jones and JFK was second place because I just can't see these other three winning. I don't think anybody ever wins an Oscar for a performance in Bugsy. And while I love Michael Lerner and Barton Fink, I just don't see that as an Oscar winning performance kind of. I don't see them giving that to him. Okay, do either Gina Davis or Susan Sarandon win if they run in supporting actress? Possibly, but I know the Academy loves, category fraud, but that would almost seem to be a bridge too far to claim that either Thelma and Louise is supporting in that movie. I just can't see it happening. But, if I'm trying to think. So at this point, Gina Davis already has an Oscar. Susan Sarandon doesn't. If Susan Sarandon won it, if they for some reason ran her in supporting actress, possibly, I can see them giving her an Oscar, but I can't see them doing that category wise. Even for them, it seems too much. Who finished sixth in the Best Picture race? I would say Boys in the Hood. based on that it did get a director nomination. It's just was so critically acclaimed and it's so good. My guess would be Boys in the Hood was the one that just missed out. Why didn't Silence of the Lambs get a score, editing, or cinematography nomination? Beats the hell out of me. Oscars don't know quality. What else can I say? Yeah, it's ridiculous that it didn't get those nominations. I mean, it's like they appreciate the movie enough to nominate it for picture, director, everything, but they're just going to overlook the other, technical aspects of it. That's a strange thing. Okay, for best director, who finished second, or did Oliver Stone finish second in best director? Possibly. Yeah, I would say so, because JFK was probably... I would say Oliver Stone or John Singleton. But because John Singleton was so new, and they don't always like to give awards to the new guy on their first tryout, I would say Oliver Stone probably was the one who would come in second there. What does a file of 10 Best Picture nominees look like? Interesting. So, I would want to change too many of the ones that were nominated, but obviously you have Boys in the Hood there. I would say maybe they would get Thelma and Louise in there. I would say Grand Canyon because I love Grand Canyon, but not everybody shares that view. Yeah, that's tough. I don't know. Maybe Fisher King. That might be one that would get in there. And then, yeah. So that may not be 10, but those are what I'm thinking are the next ones up in the list. Does Bugsy have the smallest cultural footprint for a double-digit Oscar nominee in the last 40 years? One of them for sure. Yeah, nobody ever talks about Bugsy. Nobody thinks about Bugsy. Bugsy's a bad movie. Let's just be honest. So, for good reason, people don't think about it. It's a crazy movie. It is it's like trying to be a comedy half the time. Then other time, it's trying to be like a tough gangster movie. It's just really a tonal mess, in my opinion. Why didn't Kevin Costner get a Halo nomination when Dances with Wolves was a year earlier? That's interesting. It feels like he should have. Like I would have, if someone had just told me and I hadn't been looking at the list, like what were the best actor nominees for that year, I would have absolutely thought Kevin Costner would be on the list. I mean, as we talked about, Robin Williams in The Fisher King, that's a supporting performance in my opinion. It shouldn't even be an actor. I know a lot of people like Nick Nolte in The Prince of Tides. I think he's crazy, just a raving, over the top. I think it's just not a good. I don't like that performance. I much prefer him in Cape Fear. I don't know if I answered that question, but yeah, I'm not sure why Kevin Costner didn't, because it seems like it'd be the perfect time for that to happen. If Jodie Foster didn't have an Oscar for The Accused, does she win for Nell in 1994? Or would she have just won the Oscar for Silence of the Lambs? I don't think she wins for Nell regardless of if she won the first one. Like if she didn't win for The Accused, she still definitely wins for Silence of the Lambs, but I don't necessarily think she wins for Nell in 1994. My guess was always that it was kind of between Jessica Lange and Winona Ryder. Because that would almost seem to be the best time for Winona Ryder. You know, she was kind of expected by a lot of people to win the year before for Age of Innocence, and it didn't happen. So I bet she was pretty close in that Best Actress run for 1994, and she should have been because she's great in Little Women. Okay. Executives are forcing you to give an above-the-line nomination to either Hook, My Girl, Ernest Scared Stupid, or What About Bob? What nomination are you giving and why? Oh. Okay, I think Dustin Hoffman for supporting actor in Hook. That's what I would say. I think he's having a great time in that movie. He's awesome. The movie's good. Don't let anybody fool you. It's a good movie, and he's great in it. And I'm not always a big Dustin Hoffman fan. I find him sometimes he kind of gets on my nerves a little bit, and I find him very actorly, like very mannered at times. But he really lets go in Hook, and he's just having a good time, and I really like him in that movie. So I would say Dustin Hoffman in Hook. Where do you rank Sleeping with the Enemy on the list of bad spouse films? Well, I saw it. I watched it for the first time for the recap or for the prep, and I thought it was pretty bad. Not terrible, but as these, I think I mentioned on the episode, I have like a soft spot for these like lurid 90s thrillers. But even with that, as far as those go, this one was kind of just meh, just in the middle of the pack. Not super exciting, yeah. If you're looking at the spouse himself, that was a bad spouse. Like he was pretty awful and pretty, he actually was kind of scary at times. So, I guess it ranks for me somewhere in the middle. I think there's much better ones. Okay. I miss the days of true Billboard #1 songs going head to head at the Oscars. Give us a few minutes on the runner-up, Bryan Adams, and everything he's done for you. Or if you prefer, talk about the late wrestler, Bryan Adams. Okay, all I can say about this is I went to a show here in Nashville at a place we have here called the Ryman, sort of a smaller concert venue. It used to be where the Grand Ole Opry was. And I went to see Ryan Adams. And a drunk guy got up in the middle of the show and started screaming that he wanted him to play Summer of '69. And Ryan Adams had that person thrown out of the concert for that. He has no sense of humor about being joked about or mistaken for Bryan Adams in any way. But yeah, Bryan Adams is awesome. Reminds me of my childhood. Heaven is a great song. And of course, yes, that song from Robin Hood was just everywhere. Like it was such a big colossal hit when I was a kid. So, and it's a pretty good song. Okay, how would you rank My Own Private Idaho amongst the many modern takes on Shakespeare we got in the 90s? For me, very high. I think it's one of the best of those Shakespeare interpretations. It seemed like in the late 90s, it became more of updating Shakespeare to like high school or a teenage mindset. And some of those are good. But yeah, I think, and I'm also thinking of like the, actually no, the Branagh movies don't really count because those aren't modern takes. Those are just versions of them. So My Own Private Idaho would definitely be up at the top for me of those Shakespeare modernizations because to me it's just a terrific movie. Okay. Anthony Hopkins is widely renowned as the greatest to ever do it. Much of his career to the general public starts around this time when he is in his mid-50s. Who are some of the other actors that are past their prime that you love and have shot to stardom later than a typical Hollywood career? The one that popped in my head first was Paul Giamatti, and I don't even know if he was really that old, but when Sideways came around, that was sort of when he really exploded, it felt like. Or maybe American Splendor, but yeah, somewhere around there. And he was probably, I think he was in his 40s, so yeah, that was the example that popped into my head first. And he's great. I love Paul Giamatti. But I'm trying to think I don't know about some other examples. James Gandolfini was a little bit older when he, kind of finally got his break on The Sopranos and stuff. Although I remember him from things like True Romance and a terrific Charlie Sheen movie from 1994 called Terminal Velocity about skydivers. Definitely check that out if you haven't. Okay, how rude is it that The Rocketeer never received a sequel? Well, you know what? I actually did not get to The Rocketeer on my prep, and I watched it only once as a kid, and I just remember nothing. So unfortunately, I can't throw my hat in the ring on this one. I meant to get to it, and it just slipped through the cracks somehow. Okay, when judging a movie like Daughters of the Dust that feels like it was simultaneously made before cameras were invented and made tomorrow, how do you judge it next to a movie like Silence of the Lambs that feels hyper modern? Well, Daughters of the Dust is one of those movies that while I was watching it, I could tell I'm going to watch it again. And it feels like that kind of movie you'll get more out of every time you see it. There's so much going on there. And it's not even like the stuff going on with the story or even like with the dialogue. It's like all vibes almost. Like it's a feeling that movie gives you that's so kind of overwhelming, especially by the end. So I think I really like movies like that, but I also, can appreciate the Silence of the Lambs thing where it's more of a, I guess, regimented, like here's this, it takes you from point A to point B through the story and does so perfectly, so it's like they're both different kinds of great movies. But yeah, they scratch different itches for sure. This next question, I don't even want to read because it's bullshit, but somebody, Peterson, wrote, Hook is arguably Spielberg's worst film. Do you think making it a musical as initially intended would help, or is this somewhat of a cursed project? This is a flawed question. The premise is wrong, so I'm not going to answer it. Hook is awesome. What are your favorite horror movies of the year? I liked The People Under the Stairs. I thought that was a good horror movie that was also kind of fun. I loved how they had Ed and Nadine from Twin Peaks playing the bad guys. That was good. I'm trying to remember if that might have been the only one I've seen. I saw a movie called Popcorn. That's a very low budget like horror movie that maybe only like horror fanatics would remember. I saw it because I remember when I was a kid, the TV ad used to scare me really bad when it would like come on. And I was like 6, so. But yeah, I'd say People Under the Stairs. That's the one I'm probably forgetting one, but that's the one I liked. Okay, did My Own Private Idaho walk so Brokeback Mountain could run? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, when I mentioned that on this show too, it was like My Own Private Idaho, that kind of LGBTQ representation just was few and far between back then. Like it was pretty bold in what it was doing. And, you look at it and, obviously it was a queer filmmaker making it, but like you look back on it now and it kind of is surprising that it was 35 years ago and the movie was made in that way and allowed to be made in that way, which is awesome. But yeah, I think movies like that definitely laid the groundwork for something like Brokeback Mountain. Compare and contrast Keanu Reeves' performances in My Own Private Idaho and Point Break. Well, they're pretty similar because I don't think Keanu Reeves is an actor with tremendous range. I do like My Own Private Idaho, but he is not my favorite part of that movie. I think sometimes Keanu Reeves, I just don't think he just can't be asked to take on too much. It gets a little strange. Having said that, I think the movie he's used best in is Parenthood, because he's kind of playing a guy who I imagine Keanu Reeves might sort of be like in real life. But he absolutely does the job in Point Break. He's he plays that role well. He's convincing. Him and Patrick Swayze are great together. Yeah, and obviously I love him in Speed. When he gets to do that. So action movies for sure are his milieu, and I would say the less said about Bram Stoker's Dracula, the better. What animated films deserve to get into the Best Picture lineup before Beauty and the Beast finally did it? Well, Little Mermaid is my second favorite Disney movie, so that one. Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of the original Pinocchio. So I guess those are the two main ones I would say that would have been awesome if they could have gotten considered before Beauty and the Beast. Where does Bodhi rank for you in terms of iconic, charming villains? Is he even really a villain? Would you have let him go at the end as well? Bodhi being Patrick Swayze in Point Break, yes. I don't think of him really as a villain. He is very charming. That's the Patrick Swayze effect, obviously. Absolutely would have let him go at the end. Okay, these are questions about Robin Hood. Is Kevin Costner's accent one of the worst attempts at an English accent ever? Yes, insofar as that he's trying to do one, because at some points in the movie he just gives up and doesn't do it anymore. So the attempt is rough when you hear it, but at certain points he kind of stops trying and just is like, well, fuck this, I'm going to do what I want to do. Which is, there's a certain charm to that as well. That he's just like, whatever. Did Alan Rickman only not get nominated because the film was considered bad? As in he won the BAFTA? Probably. I would say that's a good reason, I think, is just that the movie didn't go over well with critics, and people generally consider it not that good. And it's a borderline comedy role. It's, very silly, and the Oscars don't love silly. So I think that might have been why he was overlooked. Is The Doors one of the few acceptable music biopics? I think it's an interesting one. I like the fact that it doesn't follow the same, Dewey Cox Walk Hard structure that all the music biopics before, and amazingly all the ones since Walk Hard still do. They still follow that exact same trajectory that they were making fun of in 06 or 07, which is wild to me that they still, keep that same thing going. But no, I like The Doors for what I don't think it's great, but I like that it's innovative, trying something different. It feels like the kind of movie about The Doors would have made. So I think I admire parts of it. I would say I admire a lot of it, and I love Val Kilmer in it. So, what real life couple would you cast if you were making Bugsy today? Oh, well, they've got to be able to do that kind of annoying banter pretty well. Kristen Bell and Dax Shepard. No explanation. Those are my answers. Okay. Rest in peace, River Phoenix. What roles that have been played by his peers since he died do you think he would have been great in? Nearly all of them. Like he was so great, and he was obviously like on a meteoric rise. He would have been huge. He's one of the best actors maybe we've had in the last 30, 40 years. A role he would have been good in. I think he would have been really good in Fight Club. I can see him actually playing either role in Fight Club, if I'm being honest. I think he would have been great. I'm trying to think of other stuff. Maybe playing Brad Pitt's character in Seven. That would be interesting to see River Phoenix in that role. I don't know why I keep picking only Brad Pitt movies, but it kind of feels like that in a way, that Brad Pitt ended up benefiting from a lot of like roles that River Phoenix wouldn't have been able to take after he died. So, trying to think of a better answer. Oh, how about the John Cusack part in Being John Malkovich? That would be a great role for River Phoenix. All right. Well, that's it. Those are the listener questions. And all right. Hope you guys enjoyed the episode. Bye.
All right, Scott. Awesome stuff. Loved the answers. Plenty of hilarity in there. I'm glad you took some time to do that. I also really appreciate you being on the episode itself, as well as Liz Arnold, who didn't have a chance to get to any of these questions, but that's totally okay. I will be back 1 month from now tackling even more questions, though those are going to be related to the year 1982, where Richard Attenborough's Gandhi won Best Picture. But while I've got you here really quickly, I hope you take time to rate and review the show on the preferred podcast streaming platform you're using, as well as finding and following the show on all social media apps using the handle Rev Almanac. As always, I'm Andrew, and I cannot wait to see you next time. Thanks.